to see a real Holocaust survivor. I was born in Krakow, in Poland, an old city with a university and a castle. And it's an old city. And my dad came from eastern part of Poland. My mom came from Krakow. She was part of a very old Jewish family that had lived there in that area for a very long time. My dad was a Zionist. He spoke fluent Hebrew. He believed in the state of Israel becoming the country for the people. But my dad was devoted to Israel. He spoke Hebrew. I mean, he was fluent in Hebrew, which was unusual for a man born in Poland. He had several doctorates in a variety of a doctorate in law, doctorate in political science, doctor in economics, and one from Vienna, one from, I think from Krakow. I'm not sure if you know that when the Second World War started, Poland was taken from the west by Germany and from the east by Russia. Russia came in from the east. I don't know. Stalin and Hitler must have had an agreement that they would divide Poland between them. And so, as I said, my parents were deported to Siberia, and God was looking after them because they were the only adults in my family who survived. I and my first cousin, Gabby, who became my brother during the war, we became Catholics, and we were living with a family on a farm. And my responsibility was to make sure that Gabby, who was exactly 1 year younger than I, would never pee in front of anybody. And I said, I don't understand why he's not allowed to pee in front of anybody. And they said, well, because he's circumcised. He's what? Well, they tried to explain to me. I was 5, then I became 6, and I was trying to understand what it meant. But it was clear that he was different than the other boys, and it was very important that his penis not show up on anybody's, that he be very, very careful when he went to pee, and that he did not pee publicly in front of anybody, because that would make him noticeable. The boys would notice him and they would say, why is he different? And then questions would start. So it was my responsibility. I was exactly 1 year older than Gabby. Gabby was my first cousin, my mother's brother's son, and he and I survived together. And we lived on a farm. The farm was owned by a professor of Latin and Greek, highly educated family. The daughters, there were 2 daughters, they were highly educated. The mother and the father were highly educated. And so one of the things that was important for them was to educate us, which made them make me read books. My father had a doctorate in law and political science and economics. He had all kinds of high education. He spoke many different languages. He spoke fluently Russian and German and Polish and and French, and the thing that he, from the very beginning, when I was very little, the thing that he told me was that I must never be envious of my girlfriend's beautiful dresses, or what they had, the toys that they had, because he said, my dad said, what you have in here is the most important thing. Being able to think and solve problems and understand people, understand what's going on, understand situations, that's more important than beautiful dresses. Of course, when I was 4, 5, and 6, it was a little difficult to understand, but nevertheless, eventually, I had none of those things. I wound up not having any clothes, and I wore pants and shirts, and that was it. I had one of each, and that's what I lived with. It was an important lesson to understand that those people who used to come in uniforms to visit her professor, if they saw that Gabby had a different penis, they would kill him. And I didn't understand. Why would somebody want to kill my Gabby, my so it was very important to understand something which was so difficult to understand. Why did they want to kill Gabby and me? Because we were Jewish. What is being Jewish? What does that mean? It was meaningless to me. It didn't, we didn't understand. But the one thing that I did understand was that when I went to church, the priest was very proud of me because I could read, and most of the kids in the village could not read. So I could read, and since my parents both spoke German at home sometimes so that I wouldn't understand, I also learned some German, so I was able to understand the Germans when they were coming and talking, and they were in the village and nobody else understood them. The peasants didn't understand them, but I did. And I was able to tell them what was going on and what the Germans were saying. And so I became a very important person in my, you know, it was an experience that has permeated my life. And I am forever able to understand how it feels to have to survive. I could not believe that later when I found out where my village was, uh, we were very close to Auschwitz, and Oświęcim was right around the corner. And of course, I found that out later when I went traveling there. We were lucky. Gabby and I were very lucky because our foster parents were very, very kind people. As I said, he was a professor and she was a pianist. So one of the things that my uncle had apparently arranged when he sent us to live with this family was that we were both, Gabby and I were both, to take piano lessons. So the mother, who was a pianist, she was teaching us to play the piano. And what's very interesting is that afterwards, after the war and after everything, One of the most difficult things for me to do, despite the fact that I love music and I really love the piano, was to sit down at the piano and play. I have a piano at home, but I never play. I've never been able to sit down and actually play some of the things that I had learned during the war. It's completely obliterated in my brain. It doesn't exist. My uncle, when he made the papers for us, Gabby and I, his son Gabriel, and I were taken to live with his family. And my uncle said, you are not Yona Künstler, you are now Janka Leszek. What? I mean, why am I Janka? Well, you understand you are not, your identity has changed because to be able to survive, you have to be someone different. You cannot be Jewish. Now, you do understand that when you are 7 or however old I was at the time, to understand what it is to be Jewish, what does it mean? What is a Jew? I had no idea what it meant because people were not called Catholics or Jews or Protestants. They were called so and so and so and so, and they did not have a name of their religious um, belonging. I liked going to church. I liked the music. I liked the solemnity, the quietness, the sort of everybody was quiet and nobody behaved badly. And when I was allowed to go, because I wasn't always allowed to go, I was very happy. The, the priest in our church was very proud of me because I was able to read the prayer book. None of the other kids could read. I was the only one who could read. And why was that? What was, well, I don't know why, but that's how it was. My father had taught me to read when I was very young. Because my father said to me, he said, all of these things that you are envious of, your little girlfriends who have beautiful dresses and they have beads and they have this and they have that, and you don't have any of it. He said, don't be envious because I think, he said, and he knew that I loved my father, I adored my father. So he said to me, the only thing that is important in what you have in here, because what you have in here allows you to solve problems, allows you to figure a way when there are obstacles of how to overcome them and survive. And as time went on and the war continued, my uncle, all of my relatives on my father's side and my mother's side, they all perished. The only survivors were my parents, who had been deported to Siberia and wound up living in Russia. They wound up living in Kazakhstan ultimately, in a place called Jambul. And my father, the Polish embassy, you know, asked him to do certain things that he was able to do for them, not as a diplomat, but as helper of all those people who had been deported to Russia, who were Polish and who didn't speak Russian, whereas my father was fluent in Russian. I had no idea that they were alive. And then there was one day after the war, and I don't know when, this man came and he had white hair and he had glasses and he looked somewhat familiar. And I thought, I think I know him from before the war. You know, that was my sort of story. I know him from before the war. I was called into the living room where the piano was. And the family was sitting around and they were very, very serious. And somebody turned to me and said, Janka, do you know who this is? And I turned and I was going to say, well, I was going to sort of make up a story that I think, you know, I was going to pretend like I actually was recognizing. And I looked and my father said my name. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was going to faint. And I said, it's my daddy. It's my father. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And the only thing that I thought was, I have to stay solid. I must not faint, because I felt like everything was leaving me. And I could not believe that here in front of me was standing my daddy. And he was, of course, being, you know, invited. He was, you know, everybody was asking him because they didn't know about my parents. My parents were deported to Siberia. And the only thing that they knew was my uncle, Gabby's father, who placed us with this family, but he didn't know anything about my parents. He didn't know where they were or if they were alive. So he didn't say, you know, these are the children of so and so, and the parents are in Russia. By then, they were in Kazakhstan. And this man looked at me and he said my name. And I just about fainted, because he was the only one who used to call me that. And I realized that this stranger with white hair and thick glasses was my father. And that here he was, my father. Everybody else from the family, my aunt, my uncle, everyone the Germans had killed by then, because that was when the war had ended. And my father apparently moved heaven and earth to be able to get out and get back to Poland. And I believe that sometime during the time of war, when they were able to communicate, my uncle must have told him that he placed us somewhere with a family, you know. And so as soon as my father could move heaven and earth, he came back to Poland. Nobody was coming out of Russia. Nobody was coming out from any other country. And he came back because he was going to find me, and he did. And the family had no idea that there was a Dr. Philip Künstler. They didn't know that, my uncle didn't tell them. And so the family where we lived, they said to my father, since Janka recognized you and said you were her father, you may take her, but you cannot take Gabby because his father said he was coming for him. Of course, his father was gone by then, and my father had to go to court right then and there, right after the war, and he had to go to court. But my father was also a lawyer, so he knew what to do pretty quickly, and he was able to get the papers, and we were able to get Gabby, whom I refer to as my brother, but he was really my cousin, my first cousin. And it was a very unusual story because there were very few people who had survivors that came from Russia and found them alive. And so that's why people kept asking me about the story. So that's why I wrote that book, so that I would have a record of what had happened. And the Jews were being killed by, right, left, and sideways. Who wanted to be a Jew? Nobody wanted to be a Jew. After the war, I was a Catholic. And all of a sudden, my father there was some kind of a Jewish holiday. My father was celebrating the Jewish holiday, and I was looking, and it wasn't that I didn't understand. I understood, but I couldn't absorb the fact that you could be a Jew, you could be a Catholic, you could be anything else, which is what my father was eventually trying to explain to me, that people were honoring different gods. And that was even more difficult to understand. And anyway, I accepted his explanation eventually. They were, first of all, they were older. All of the sisters were older, and they had knowledge of things that I didn't, because they had had time to go to school, whatever, and I was not. I didn't know how to read and write. I mean, I did know how to read because my father had taught me to read when I was very young, but I did not know how to write. And so they had advantages that I did not have. And so there were power plays, when they would tell me what to do, and I had to do it because they had the power and I didn't.
It was a little bit of a Cinderella situation, where my mom and her brother, her cousin, had to live
Gabi.
as second-class citizens. Um, did you live in the attic of the house? Did
No,
you live in the attic?
no,
Do you remember storing bread for Gabby?
yes. Hiding it, yeah. No, but we didn't live in the attic. We lived in in the stables and downstairs. We did not live. Besides, the attic was really just a storage place. Was we were living on a farm. Yeah.
What can you tell us about Gabby and the life he had after the war?
Well, Gabby decided that he was going to take care of people. And when we were living in Paris, he went to medical school. He became a doctor. And he took care of people, right?
The four of them emigrated. They lived in Paris after the war.
Yes.
There's actually more story after they left Poland. My mother was in a displaced persons camp.
Yeah, I was in a DP
Germany.
camp in Germany.
With the intent to go to Israel. She got sick, appendicitis, got some illness, and she missed the trip, in essence, where all the Jews were, went to Palestine, to what would become Israel. Fortuitous or not, but her family rejoined, and they moved to Paris. And they lived in Paris for 6 or 7 years, something like that, and then emigrated. My grandfather had an uncle who lived in Los Angeles, and they came from Paris directly to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Beverly Hills.
Not yet. My uncle at the time, Gabby, was college age, and so he actually did a year at UCLA. So he did his freshman year at UCLA and decided to do an internship at the French embassy or consulate in New York. Spent the summer there, and while he was there, the French government or whatever offered him a full ride to medical school if he returned to France. And so he didn't particularly like Los Angeles. He had left his friends there and the life that he knew. And so it was an attractive offer for him to return to Paris. So he did, and he went back to Paris, went to medical school, became a doctor. He became a pathologist in Paris, and lived there for the rest of his life. Had a family, got married, had 2 children. I have had 2 cousins who live in Paris, and we've been traveling to Paris since I was 3.
Yes.
Every couple of years to visit my uncle, and I have, of the 4 of them, there's only 1 left. So I do have a cousin left, and he still lives in Paris. Gabby passed away 3, 4, 5 years ago, something like that. But lived in Paris. The rest of his life.
Thank you, Ari, for helping me.
So the family knew you guys were Jews, right? You and your cousin.
One professor knew that you were a Jew.
They knew, but the whole village.
I have no idea.
Oh.
I have no idea if they knew.
What was the story to the neighbors? How do they explain that suddenly?
I have no idea.
She was 7 or 8.
Wow.
I have no idea.
Handed over to a family with her brother, and
We were cleaning the stables and taking care of the pigs and the cows, and we didn't ask questions.
So
didn't think about it.
War, right? So whether you were Jewish or not, you were suffering. There was not food. There wasn't consistent supply of food. There wasn't, obviously, the Germans had taken over the place. So
everyone was in distress.
Everyone was in distress. They first went east. I don't know if she explained that, but they went east from Krakow and went to Tarnopol, which is where
Lviv.
My grandfather was from, and his sister lived there.
Yes.
And then they stayed.
They had a candy and chocolate factory. Yeah, the family.
Did you have a connection with the family that brought you in, or their children after, or it was after the war?
It was during the war.
No, as
Well,
an
after,
adult.
after, do we know what the family or their descendants or their kids are doing now? Or?
Yeah, yes, after the war, in the 60s, I believe late 60s, 1960s, my mom got married, and she and my father traveled to Poland. And
Oh, yeah.
I don't think you went to Poland before that, did you? I don't think you had been back to Poland, right?
I don't remember.
Okay, so left Poland in probably 46, 47. Ended up after Paris and Los Angeles, met my father, got married, and they decided to travel back to Poland, which I'm going to guess is probably difficult for my mom to do. But when they did go to Poland, they found the farmhouse or whatever, found the family, and I reconnected with the three daughters. I don't know if all three of them were alive at that point. I'm going to guess they probably were. But my mom did stay in touch with the three daughters. I think both the mother and the father had passed by that.
Yes,
When
they
you
had
reconnected
passed.
with them, do you
Yeah.
remember? Do you remember going back to Poland and meeting the three daughters, meeting
Yes.
the family, and the parents were dead?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Professor was dead. Yeah. And so was, yeah.
Were the daughters receptive to meeting you after all that time?
I'm sorry?
Were they receptive to meeting you? Did they want to meet you?
Yeah,
Were they
oh.
happy to see you?
Yeah, well, everybody was curious to see what's happened, and,
You also have to remember the context. This is
Yeah.
late 60s Poland, which is now part of the Soviet Union, or under the aegis of the Soviet
Yeah.
Union, right? So they're surviving on bread, and two wealthy Americans show up, in nice clothes, not from a communist country. So I would imagine that they were probably very excited to see my mom and
yes,
reconnect with her. My
yes.
mother, when Poland became no longer, when the Soviet Union broke apart and Poland became independent, my mother found a lawyer, went back to Poland, and actually was able to regain title to the building that her parents owned in Krakow, a 5-story apartment building. It's actually where she was born and
Yeah.
grew up,
Yeah.
or spent the first 5 years of her life. So she was able to petition the state after, obviously, it took a couple of years to prove to the Polish government that this was a building that was taken over by the communist government, that it actually belonged to her and her family, and that she's the only descendant, the only heir, and so she was able to get title to the building.
And what's happening with the building right now?
I know.
She
Go on
sold.
vacation?
So there were some European developers that made her a nice offer, probably 15 years ago, something like that.
But it was you who handled it, not me. Yeah, he knows about it. Oh, no.
A little bit
Yeah.
here and there.
I wasn't that interested. Yeah.
So, as a kid, I went to Temple Beth Am Hebrew School, and my mom, like many moms do, drove carpool. And so when we were in carpool, instead of, I don't know, doing whatever, I and the other kids in the car would pepper my mom with stories, with requests for stories. And so she would tell these stories about her time in the war. And after having told them numerous times, she decided to actually put those words on paper, and so wrote this book for me and my sister and our descendants, and so that there's some record of it.
So this is
describes,
this is the book.
describes her history,
Yeah.
and her experience of the war. A little more comprehensive than kind of her oral narrative today.
Why you chose the title, specifically that title? for the book?
Well, I was separated from my parents, and after the war, I wanted to be the daughter. I did not want to be the survivor. I did not want to have a story to tell my parents. So I just wanted to be. My name was Yanka, not Yona. And I wanted to be Yona again, and I wanted to be their daughter and not to be a survivor with all kinds of abilities to take care of stables and animals and and have chickens sit on their eggs and have baby chicks, all kinds of things that if you live in Southern California, you don't have little chicks. Anyway.
So, Mom, do you remember the story of having to serve tea to the German commander who came to visit the professor?
You tell the story.
I don't remember it very well, but
Yes.
it's actually I learned it actually from the book. But towards the end of the war, this professor was a man of significant importance in the town, and so the German
In the area.
German command, whatever, who were in the area, the commander decided to visit the professor. And the professor invited him for tea, and asked my mother was there, asked her to serve the tea or play piano or do something like that. Maybe his wife played piano and you had to serve the tea or something like that. And my mother was obviously very nervous at the prospect of, having to serve a German officer.
Did she understand that that was a threat, the threat that it was?
Did you understand it was a threat, Mom?
Of course. Of course. Yes. It was death.
So she had quite a few experiences where she saw Germans either kill a family member of hers with a rifle, with a machine gun in front of her, or there was one situation where they were rounded up. This is before they were sent to the farm, where they were rounded up and put into a school. And I don't remember very much about that. Do you, Mom? Do you remember about being locked up in the school with your grandfather and your uncle?
Yes, but it's vague.
So my father was not a Holocaust survivor, but his parents had come from Ukraine, Russia, whatever, to New York when they were young. So my dad was born in New York and then moved to Los Angeles. I probably, my mom probably started talking about it when I was 5, 6, 7. Weaving it into stories, weaving stories into kind of the day, right? Whatever was happening. She did not keep it a secret, as opposed to my Uncle Gabby, who did. He never spoke to his kids about his experiences during the war. I don't know if it was too painful for him or he just wanted to forget it. France is more anti-Semitic than the United States is, and has been, I guess, since they lived there. And so I think my mom felt very comfortable sharing her stories and just the type of person that she is. you can hear she's very direct, has no problem explaining anything and everything.
She would do
And
very well in Israel. She would be a rock star in Israel.
so she did share as much as she could, and like I said, you know, to the point that I knew that there were stories there, and so I would ask when she was driving carpool, and she would share those stories.
You say that there is a rise in anti-Semitism, and what do I feel?
Well, just with your experience, I mean,
It's just part of life continuing. Our life goes on, and things reinvent themselves in a slightly different, way. It's 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 the same thing, but it's in a, it has a different color. It's American, It's not Polish, because Polish anti-Semitism is very different, very different.
Worse?
Worse, yes.
They had pogroms, the Polish people against the Jews.
What?
How they had pogroms, the pogroms.
Well,
Pogroms, but how do you see anti-Semitism that occurred in Poland as being worse than it is in the United States, or why is the anti-Semitism in the United States not as bad today?
Because the whole political system is different. It's, it's a free country. It's not imposed, a certain way to be. If you're not this way, you're not accepted. You can be Catholic, or you can be Protestant, or you can be, you can adhere to any religion, even I'm trying to think.
Keep going with your thoughts.
Yeah, I was saying that, America basically is a free country. In a sense, it has different political systems that are sometimes more this way or more that way, but it is not basically a, anti-Semitic. There are people who are anti-Semites here. There are people who are anti-Semitics. There are people who are anti-different things, not only Jews, but other religions that they don't like. There are Catholics who don't like Protestants. There is, there are differences, but it's not in the same way as it was in Poland, where, to be a Jew was to be in danger at a certain point, because before that, the Jewish community was very large, and there were a lot of Jewish people in Poland. And I left. I did not have that much of a connection to the Polish Catholic way of thinking. So we were Catholics, but we didn't have Jews to hate because there weren't any. So, and we didn't worry about Protestants because Poland was mostly Catholic. So there were no religious differences. No, my father was not religious at all. My mother came from a reasonably religious family. My grandfather was religious. My mother's father. My father's family was not at all. They were in a different part of Poland. Um,
Your grandfather.
my dad had a degree. My dad had a doctorate in law, in political science, and in economics. So he had three
Who's your
doctorates.
grandfather?
Oh my God, yes.
Hasidic rabbi.
Yeah.
And I think he was a rabbi. He was a rabbi? David Spira?
No, he was just a religious Jew. He's not a
Religious
rabbi.
Jew. But
No.
her parents were business people.
Yeah.
So on her father's side, they had a candy and chocolate business.
Yes.
And on her
Factory.
mother's side, her uncle, Maurizio Muniu, and her grandfather, David, owned a seed distribution business.
Clover. Clover seeds.
Well, specific.
Yes. As a matter of fact, when Napoleon was moving around in Europe, he came to my family to make sure that he had the seeds to plant so that he would have clover for his horses, that he would grow, because clover was very high in protein. The flour of the clover was very high in protein, so it was a very important seed. And I know that they had businesses in South America, in South Africa, in all over, that they used to sell the seeds, I guess, clover seeds.
Do you know how to say clover in Hebrew?
Tiltan.
What?
Tiltan.
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 I don't know.
That's what Google says.
את מדברת עברית?
What?
את מדברת עברית?
אני לא מדברת עברית, אבל אני מבינה. אתה לא יכול לקנות אותי ולא יכול למכור אותי, אז אני יודעת.
How many languages do you speak, Mom?
How many? Ari? Ari? You figure it out.
At some point, there was about 9. So Polish, Italian,
No,
Polish,
French.
because she was born in Poland and that was the language. German because she had a German governess.
And my parents spoke German at home, so I wouldn't understand. But of course, I inherited my father's ability, and I learned all the languages they were speaking. I would speak eventually. And when I was in DP camp in Germany, we were being prepared to be shipped to Palestine before it became Israel. And so we were being taught Hebrew. And so, my parents spoke German at home, so I wouldn't understand. My governess spoke Polish to me. Okay. When the Russians came, my father was fluent in Russian. So before they were deported to Siberia.
Do you remember being on the farm and having the Russians come?
Yes.
And what happened?
And they spoke Russian, and I was the only one who could understand. Yes, they spoke Russian, but Polish is Polish and Russian is Russian. So that nobody on the farm, even though they were intellectually, doctors and lawyers and whatever, but they did not speak Russian. So I was the only one who was able to communicate with the Russian soldiers, and I was able to get chocolate. I got all kinds of goodies.
Did your family speak Yiddish now?
Both my father, I don't know about my mother because I never heard her speak Yiddish, but my father was, you know, fluent in Yiddish, in Hebrew, in German, in all the other languages. So
But did they speak Yiddish at home at all?
no,
I think Yiddish was
no, they spoke German at home.
was
Less educated.
for less educated Jews, and the more educated Jews spoke either
Yeah,
German or
yes,
Polish or Hebrew,
yes,
and not Yiddish.
no.
Obviously, she learned French upon getting to France, learned English when she came to the United States.
Actually, I heard English when I was in the DP camp in the American zone. And I used to get the bicycle from one of the men who used to come to work. One of the German laborers that came from the village that came to work. And he came on a bicycle. And I saw this big bicycle. I had only seen little bicycles with 3 wheels. And I saw this big bicycle. This man came on a bicycle. And I was so impressed with this big wheels and big bicycle. And I said, I want to learn how to ride that. And he said, get me 2 Camel cigarettes and I'll give you the bicycle. 2 Camel cigarettes and I'll give you the bicycle for the whole day. I went up to the American soldiers that were guarding the camp because I was in the American zone, and I said, please, 2 camels. And he looked at me and he said, you're too young to smoke. And he told me off. I had no idea what he was saying, but he said, no way, whatever. And I said, 2 camels, me, bicycle. Oh,
That's what I think for my wife.
the soldier,
Same, pretty much, you know.
the soldier, he figured it out. He gave me 2 cigarettes, 2 camels, and I gave the German who came to work, I gave him the 2 camel cigarettes, and I got the bicycle for the whole day. I figured out how to get,
Yona, you are
Yeah.
amazing. Other questions, you guys?
I got one.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for people now who may be facing the next Holocaust and how to talk to the powers and tell them that it's not a good idea to do what they're doing? Or should we just get guns?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't think anyone at this point is facing the Holocaust. It is not. You may be facing death. Death comes in anyway, one way or another. But the Holocaust is a whole different thing. It's not something that you can equalize. Yeah, it's
The scale of what exists today, or the scale of what happened in the Holocaust, isn't possible today in your mind. Not repeatable.
no, I don't think so. I don't. I mean,
As an
Yeah.
example, when COVID hit, as I'm sure many of you were a bit freaked out, as was I would have conversations with my mother, and my mother would say, it's going to be fine. Her perspective of how bad it could be made it so that COVID was a blip. It was a minor inconvenience.
Right.
And that's it.
how being a survivor has shaped me.
You ask great questions, by the way.
Huh?
They're great questions. No, answer. How has being a survivor, how has it shaped your life or shaped your personality? How has it shaped you?
I would overcome. I If I was hungry, I figured out, I went to the woods, I picked mushrooms because they were available and I knew which ones were good and which ones were poisonous. And I could cook them and eat them and not be hungry. And in some ways, many different things like that when you, this was something that nobody in the family, you know, the family that I lived with, he was a professor, the father. The mother was a pianist. Both of them were highly educated. The daughters were also highly educated. So they were not, people that, peasants. They were not peasants. But I knew things that they didn't know because I used to go to the woods and I used to pick things there that they didn't know because they didn't go to the woods. And I learned to survive in many different ways and make me feel that I was safe. And at all times when, I came to America, when I was raising my children, whatever, it was, I never had the feeling that something was going to be so overwhelming that I couldn't solve it. So, I knew that I could figure out how not to be hungry because you know, as I said, I could always go to the woods and pick mushrooms.
Do you remember having it being cold and your feet being cold and what you did?
Oh, what did I do? You tell them.
Something to do with a cow?
Oh, you've got to be kidding. Do I have to tell them that?
Tell the story.
I'd go into the stable and I'd step into the dung. When the cow relieved itself, the dung would be very warm and it would steam. So I knew that it was hot. So I would stay in the the cows had dung that was, like, I'm trying to think of the word. Horses don't have the same kind of dung. Horses have different dung, which is more. Sorry? What?
You said the cows is soft and the horse is hard.
That's right. The cows is, the cows is mushy and the horses is hard. Yeah.